Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to start putting my ultimate Highboy back together, mainly the 428, and hopefully be getting it in the chassis and the cab back on the frame. So let's go dig into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So yeah, today we're going to be doing the engine for the Ultimate Highboy back there. The last episode we tore this thing down and we started getting into the engine there and kind of quit at the teardown stages. Well, now we're at the assembly stages. I got the engine, the rod bearings and main bearings in and started putting everything together here. On the last episode, I had talked about rolling them in and decided I was just going to pull the crank out. Since we were this deep in, and pull the crank out and put the mains in and put the crank back in. That way I can lube everything up and know everything goes together well. Well, since I'm not planning on taking the cylinder heads off, I realized I can't do that. Because I started taking the rods off so I could pull the crank, and I realized I'm not going to be able to rotate the crank around to get to all the rods here. So that isn't going to work because the rods still have to stay in the block because I'm not taking the heads off, so I can't punch the rods out. And they were getting in the way when you tried to rotate the crank. So I am going to roll the bearings in. I've already done the center one, the thrust bearing, because that was going to be the trickiest. I kind of made sure I could get it done on that one. So we're going to be rolling in the other bearings here. Now, I know this is not the ideal way to do this. This probably isn't even the recommended way to do it, but it's the way I'm doing it on this engine because I need to get this thing done. So it is kind of a common practice on mainly like big rig kind of stuff. You do in frames and rolling bearings in and that kind of thing. There probably is some people that do like roll bearings in when you're under a car. If you can get to the oil pan, you can sometimes roll some bearings in on those. And it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of a patch job, or I don't want to say a patch job because it is a common practice, but it's not the best way to do it. Let's put it that way. You know, the best way to do it would be completely blow this thing apart, clean everything. Have a clean room, put everything back together in pristine, you know, make sure there's not a speck of dust in the thing. That's the perfect way to do it. We're not doing that on this episode, so we're basically just doing a quick throw some bearings in it and get some more life out of this engine without having to completely blow it apart. So I am glad I am doing it because the bearings, this is the upper, I think that's the upper bearing that I've took out. So I did get a peek at some of the rod bearings that I took out here, and they are even worse. So we're going to peek at those later. So glad we ended up doing the bearings. Hopefully that gets us some more miles out of this thing and gets some more enjoyment out of it. You know, I don't put a ton of miles on this thing, so if it lasts another 25, 30,000 miles, that's going to last me 10, 15 years maybe. So, because we've put 10,000 on it in the last 4 years, so maybe not that many years, but you know, we'll get enough use out of the thing. And if it does give us problems down the road, we'll just tear the engine down and do a whole freshen up on it. But the cylinder walls are good, so we're leaving that as is. So I'm going to finish up with the rod bearings here. We're going to take you guys along for a couple so I can show you what I'm doing, and then we'll get in after the rod bearings. Okay, starting with the next main bearing here. I'm doing the second one here. Doing them one at a time, just to keep things simple. Here is the cap on that one. You can see some of the copper is definitely showing on that one. Like I said, I don't think I mentioned it earlier in the last video I did. The reason the bearings on this thing are pretty iffy, or what I think the reason is we had some issues with the intake manifold gaskets, and it started sucking oil out of the valley. Where the lifters are, and I ran this thing out of oil before I knew there was an issue. And it, you know, I don't know how long it ran with pretty low oil in it, and I was pulling in the shop and the lifters started clattering, and you know, that usually tells you you're out of oil pressure, and I checked my oil and I was out of oil. So that probably caused the damage, but that was probably 2 years ago now. So it's ran a long time like this, but I knew it had kind of issues because the oil pressure was doing some funny stuff, and that's why I was checking everything. But we still had oil pressure. I just knew the bearings were probably showing a little damage. Okay, now rolling them in, what I'm doing is I have this little brass screw. I use this because it's softer than the steel, just so we're not gouging anything. We should never have to worry about that anyway, because you shouldn't be forcing anything, but it's just good insurance. And I have it bent. Can you see that? I have it bent to follow the oil gallery because it kind of goes in an angle. And I also have it kind of clearanced because we're going in here in the oil gallery of the crank, and then we're going to use the crank to spin that upper bearing out of the block. And this has to have clearance to get spun around and not get caught on the block. So I have it there in the oil gallery of the crank, and we have to spin it on the opposite direction of the tab on the bearing, because it has to go, you know, that won't allow it to rotate under the block there. So make sure we get our screw in the right spot. There we go. And we'll spin it around. And now we're pushing that upper bearing out. And there it's out. So it's not that bad, but on the mains, the bottom's what takes the beating, because it's trying to push the crank out the bottom of the oil pan. So the uppers don't really get that much use. So, but it still had some trash go through it, some junk at some point. But our crank looks really good. You know, if you had it out, you would obviously polish it, but it looks good enough to put it together for what we're doing here. Okay, so here are our main bearings. Sometimes there's an upper and a lower on your main bearings. There will be one with a hole in it, obviously like this one. That always goes in the top, but sometimes both the uppers and the bottoms, uppers and lowers have holes in them, and they're exactly the same. In that case, it doesn't matter. But if you have one that's a solid bearing on the bottom and then one that has a hole, the one you definitely want to put the hole on the top, because that's where the oil feeds the crank. So if you screw that up, you're going to have a bad day when you fire your engine up. It's not going to last very long, let's put it that way. So I'm going to dunk these in oil just so they're completely soaked in oil. Then I put it on top, and I'll rotate it back around and get that back under the crank. All right, we're soaked in oil. Now we have to get our screw out of the way. All right, we're soaked in oil, and I have our screw out of the way. Now we have to make sure our tab gets rotated into the correct position, and you're not trying to force that thing in there. It is very important when you're doing this to not force anything, because if you're forcing something, it's not correct. Getting these things started is always the trick. All right, got it started. And you can kind of push it by hand if you can to kind of get it started. And then you can use that screw to send it home. And now it's installed. So that bearing is sitting in there nice and flush. Alright, putting the main cap back on with the new bearing. I'm using assembly lube to get some lube on that bearing for startup instead of just motor oil. Make sure you get the cap on there in the correct orientation. These luckily have a little triangle cast in it towards the front of the engine, and they are also numbered, which is pretty handy. And the rods are numbered as well. The top and bottoms are stamped. So that is pretty handy in helping you not get screwed up on this. I'm going to torque these to 100 foot-pounds. There's our pre-torque. We'll do our final torque to 100. I know this torque wrench is overkill. I don't have an in-between one. There's 100. So, I'm going to continue doing that on the rest of our mains and get the oil seal in the back, and then we'll move on to the rods. Alright, well, I got the rest of the main bearings rolled in. Those went together no problem. The rear one here with the rear main seal, that was kind of a pain. I did that off camera because wanted to do some research on that. This is my first time doing a Ford FE bottom end, so just wanted to do some research to make sure I did that rear main seal correctly. And I found a video from this guy, My Vintage Iron 7512. He seems to have a machine shop. He had a video showing how he does the rear main seals on the FE. That really helped me get this thing figured out. Mainly it was the side seals. Those were giving me some problems getting those started in there and getting in there without getting them out of place and making sure they're in the right place and sealed up correctly. So I think we have that all taken care of. And same thing goes for the whole rolling the bearings in thing. This is my first time doing that, so really, if you're looking for a how-to video, this probably isn't it. I'm just showing you guys how I'm doing it. I actually found a video from Deboss Garage a few years back of him doing some bearings in a tractor that I watched and basically followed the procedures he showed on there. So if I'll link both of those videos in the description below if any of you guys are interested in those how-to videos and how I the process I followed to complete all of this. But since we have the main bearings done, now it's time to move on to the rods. Basically, they're going to be a lot simpler because we can push the rods down and put that bearing in under the crank without having to roll it in, basically. So, going to get that all set up, and we'll do a couple to show you guys, and then I'll finish the rest of them out. All right, we're going to be doing rod bearings now. I've already got these done. Kind of had my procedure down. These are, like I said earlier, these are a lot easier than the mains because you can give yourself a little room here as you knock the rod down. Now the rods are like basically opposite of the mains. The bottoms are going to look better, and then the tops are what take the beating because the rod's trying to push down, so it's going to be beating on the top of the rod, or the crank, the mains are trying to hold the crank in, so it's going to be the bottom of the crank taking all the beating. So you kind of get the gist there. So that bottom didn't look too bad, just same as the others, just had some trash go through it. So I'll push that rod down a little bit, rotate the engine, be careful not to keep the rod bolts off of the crank journal. And then there's our rod there, so rod bearing. So she's definitely showing some wear. I am really glad I decided to check these bearings, and we can throw these bearings in here and hopefully get this taken care of before it caused an issue, catastrophic issue, like started knocking on us or throwing a rod through the block or something terrible like that. All right, so after I got my old rod out, I got some assembly lube on it. Get it in there, taking care to get the tab in the correct spot. Once I get that in there, I'm going to rotate the crank back around. Once again, being careful of the rod bolts as to not nick the crank. Got our new cap. Also being careful to get this thing on in the correct orientation. Luckily these things are marked, so it's pretty hard to screw it up. Now I know there's going to be people in the comments that are saying, Matt, you should take this completely apart, line hone it, check your rods, check your bearing clearances, mic it, all that kind of stuff at the bare minimum, plastic gauge it, and you would be correct. But we're not doing that because this is just a down and dirty throwing bearings in it kind of a deal. So that's why we're doing it the way we are. We may get lucky and everything will work fine, which is what I'm hoping for. And there's always a chance that something fails like 500 miles after I do this. So, just so you guys are aware, I am aware of the consequences. We're going to torque these main caps to 50. When I got this engine at the auction, I got it cheap, so I guess I can't complain. I got $450 in it, so, or that's what I paid for it at the auction. And it was a Ford Reman, but it was pretty much on the end of its life as far as the Remans go. There's that other bearing. Same story. Because this engine had 40 over on the cylinder bores, 40 under on the rods, and 20 under on the mains. Which I think when I was searching for bearings, I think I saw some 60 bearings. But, you know, you're pretty much pushing on the life of your crank, being able to, you know, turn it some more and clean it up again if you screw it up. But, thankfully, this isn't some exotic forged crank or something. This is just standard cast crank, nothing special at all. If for some reason this thing ever needs a new crank, I'm just going to buy a new aftermarket one. Now the block, on the other hand, it is kind of special because you can't get a 428 block. Now you can bore a 390 block if you sonic test it, a 390, 360 block, or even a 352 block. If you sonic test it, but I think it's like 120 over or something, gets the 428 spec. But even then, if you ever have to rebuild it, you're once again at the, you know, you're not going to be able to bore it 20 over, or 30 over, or 40 over like this one is. So, but what I was getting at was the bores on this thing are 40, which I think I found some 60 pistons, but really 40 is kind of the maximum you want to go to on an engine, because you start going more than that, you're going to be getting your cylinder walls pretty thin. You could crack it if you get hot or something in that nature, and then you're junking the block basically. So this thing was 40, and it had some water in the cylinders and had some pitting, so we sleeved 2 holes to keep it at 40. But other than that, the bores were good and straight, had good taper on them, or didn't have any taper on them. So we just sleeved those 2 holes and called it good. So, you know, I didn't spend a lot on this engine, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you're like buying a used engine, that's a big deal. If you're buying an engine that's 40 over with like 40 on the mains, versus an engine that's standard or 20 or 10 or something like that. You know, it's got more life in it, more rebuilds in it basically. Which I guess if you're not putting a ton of miles on something, it's not that big of a deal. But you know, like something like this engine, if this would have been a more severe problem with the oil starvation issue and caused damage to where my crank was scored up, or I scored a cylinder wall, or got hot and stuck a piston, you know, we'd be in for a lot more work. Where if it was a standard block, we could just throw some 20 pistons in it or something and keep on down the road. That's just the way it is, I guess. These are some fancy forged pistons because it's the only ones I could get in 40 over that match the specs we need for the compression and all that. So these were some, I think they were like $600 pistons. So hopefully we don't have to change that in any form in the future. Now, since this was a irrigation engine, this 428, it just had like FT heads on it. We call them truck heads, small valves, and just a 2-barrel intake. It had propane on it, and this is just a cast crank, which is standard FE rods. Nothing special as far as rotating assembly goes. Some of these did, when I was doing some research on them, some of them did have forged cranks or maybe Lamal rods. It was kind of used as like the cleanup, you know, whatever they could get at the industrial stuff. They just threw engines together. And there's actually even some 427s that were industrial engine, if you got lucky and found one. But from what I read, most of them were just kind of standard, nothing special kind of engines. You know, it's definitely not like finding a Cobra Jet or something. All right, and there's a couple mains, or rods, sorry. I'm gonna finish out these last two, and we will be done with the bearings, hopefully at last. But like I said, the back here on the main cap, that's what's mainly worn me on the rear main seal. Hopefully that's all sealed up good. You know, it's kind of trying to not screw that up, because if your rear main seal's leaking, that's a bad day. But if it is, we'll just live with it. You know, that like this truck isn't perfect. It's hopefully we don't ever have to mess with it again, but if we do, we'll rip it out and rebuild it proper, and I'll have my machine shop guy do this if I didn't do a good job, because he sealed it up last time and it wasn't leaking. So typically I have him do my assembly on the lower ends of the FEs, just because he's done a lot more of them than I have. But yeah, we got those rods done. I'm going to finish out these last two, and then we got to clean up an oil pan. All right, well, we have everything buttoned back up on the bottom end. All the bearings are replaced. Glad to have all this taken care of. Fingers crossed that this works and save us some time. Here's our bearings we took out of there. You know, obviously we have some bearing issues there. Hopefully all of this was from that time I ran this thing out of oil. You know, you would kind of think that. And if that's the case, this thing ran for a long time with these bearings like this, or maybe, you know, it started the process and this is what they've wore into from all the years of me driving it after I did that. So we don't know. This thing actually, when it cold started, this thing still made like 80 psi of oil pressure. And even when it was the hottest it's been, you know, overheating on me in the mountain, the thing still had like 25, 30 psi of oil pressure. So it does have a high volume oil pump. That might be why. You know, it might have masked some of this bearing problems back here, and that's why this thing still made pretty good, decent oil pressure. But you know, I guess we'll see how it works out. If I saved us here on the bottom end here, if it's going to cause a problem down the road, we'll see. The cam bearings on this are likely showing issues as well, and I didn't address that, and that's mainly because typically what I see, your cam bearings are usually the better bearings of the whole setup. You know, when you tear an engine down, the rotating assembly might be showing some wear, and then your cam bearings look just fine. It doesn't take as much load as the bottom end, so hopefully the cam bearings are okay. You know, I'm kind of taking a gamble on that, but I did want to touch on that because there are cam bearings on that, and they get the same oil that your bottom end gets. So if it runs out of oil, your cam bearing's going to run out of oil. But we'll see how it works out. We'll see what this engine does. And I did inspect while I had everything apart up here, I looked down and looked at the cam loads, because this does have a flat tappet cam. And I just made sure all the cam loads looked good, and tried to see the lifters as best as I could, and everything there looked good. So I think we're all good to go there. You know, I didn't have any issues with this engine when I pulled it in here other than the starter. You know, everything was fine with it as far as I knew. So hopefully we're still good to go. Now on the oil pan side of things, I did get a plan put together. If you're wondering why I'm changing out the oil pan, this is a Highboy oil pan that I used when I put this thing together, and it actually had rust pinning right here that I didn't know after I put it together. That's why it has silicone smeared on it. That was the patch like right after I built the thing because it was leaking. And also the dipstick hole was leaking and stuff. And the paint's flaking off. So kind of just wanted to take care of this pan and change it out. And I looked at my oil pan stash, and I only had 2 Highboy oil pans, and I kind of want to keep those for my restorations. And we had this one in storage. This is a Mylodon four-wheel drive rear sump pan. This is actually my dad's. He had it on his 428 and decided to go with a factory Highboy oil pan. And since this truck is pretty much a non-factory Highboy, and the engine is kind of a little radical, not too radical, but you know, more than just a factory engine, I decided this thing would probably fit on it pretty good. Now we do have this other pickup tube we have to fit in here for the Mylodon pan, and it requires the moving the stud there from the factory pickup to over here. So I have to trim my windage tray. I'll do that later, and we'll get this oil pan set down on there. I do have to figure out something with the dipstick tube, but I kind of have an idea. I'll show you guys a little later on. I got the starter all fixed up, and I actually have 3 bolts in it now. You can see there's my grade 8 bolt that I put in for that top bolt, and there's the backside there. I still have to clearance that so it sits up flush against the block. But I also drilled out this hole back here and added it that screws into the 3rd hole in the starter that we didn't originally have. And you probably can't see it, but there's a faint line of where the bell housing goes. So that's going to interfere with the bell housing right here on the transmission, but it's right here. And I think I'm going to grind some of this off because it's just a lip right here, if you can see that. Hopefully I can grind some of this off without going all the way through to the bell housing to give us clearance for this bolt so we can have access to it. If forever we need to change the starter, I can just go back here and screw that bolt out from the back side here. And we'll have 3 bolts instead of 2. So we'll have even better chances of this not ever happening again, because I don't want this to happen again because it's a pain. But to finish up that engine back there, we have to do the timing cover so we can put the oil pan, the windage tray, and then we can put the oil pan on. And since we're doing all that, I wanted to paint everything I needed to paint blue. So I have my water pump set up here, the timing cover, and I'm also going to paint a factory OEM air cleaner just because I did have like a chrome aftermarket air cleaner on that engine. I wasn't too happy with it. And I'm just going to do an OEM one and sticker it up like a you know, generally a 428 would be, just to be kind of retro cool, I guess. Wanted to show you guys the paint I'm using. I get a lot of questions about paint. And the engine paint I like to use is this Eastwood stuff. And this is what it is, the Ford Dark Blue. I've used this in their 2K spray cans before. I haven't actually got the quart, what is this, quart bottle of it, or quart can of it. It does have an activator, so it's catalyzed paint. But I've got the 2K stuff in a spray can, and that's what I painted like the Harbor Blue Highboy engine in. And it's the same stuff, it's just in the spray can. So if you don't want to do a spray gun setup, you can buy it in the paint cans and mix it in the can. But this, since I have a paint gun set up and everything, I thought I would try this out and see how it works. And we're going to spray this stuff, and I'm going to get that timing cover on the engine, and we'll get the oil paint and everything put together. So let's go see how it turns out. Well, guys, got the painting done. It turned out really good. I really like this Eastwood blue on this. The blue color you get at the paint stores, like the 1K rattle can stuff. It just doesn't, it's not the right color, I don't think. And actually, I think my engine block is that color because that's what I painted it with. So we'll see the difference when I bolt this stuff on. But this looks really good. I'm really happy with this color. Like I said, I've used it in the past and was really happy with it. But this real dark blue color is more closely resembles the original. And this turned out really nice. I think there is a little bit of dust in it, but I mean, I'm spraying this in an open shop here, so what can you expect? It's going to look just good for this truck, and you know, it's going to get dirty and dusty and everything in no time at all, so that's not a big deal on this truck at all. So really happy with this. We're going to let this stuff dry, and then we'll start assembly on that engine. All right, well, I have the engine in the chassis. I've been slowly picking away at this thing, getting this thing back together, starting to get everything kind of sorted away. I have my distributor and spark plug wires back in, and I added some wire keepers. Before, these things were just kind of strung out wherever they were laying, and I added some clamps there to keep them all kind of sorted together. I have the air cleaner on here. I also have the intake air temperature. I added it right here in this little hump on the air cleaner setup. It worked really good right there, and it seems to clear everything okay on the Edelbrock ProFlow intake. The throttle linkage clears. I had some issues with that on my old intake, but all that seems to work. Started getting my headers installed, and got the exhaust kind of getting bolted together to make sure everything lines up good. I ran into a problem with the dipstick. Here I have it set up here. I was considering running truck manifolds, so like F600 manifolds, because it fit perfectly on this side, and I had a dipstick that fit perfect right into the pan. But on the passenger side, it didn't work, and it was hitting the engine pedestal. So I decided just to toughen through it and make a dipstick work with these headers. Another reason I kind of decided, or I was thinking about doing a manifold, was both of these headers were cracked, and you know, not that big of a deal. I welded them up, but you know, I just had some, I had those truck manifolds, and those things are pretty beefy, and seems like they would flow pretty good, and it might help quiet this engine down a little bit. But the issue with the passenger side, I just thought, yeah, not worth the hassle, and I'd have to rework the exhaust and all that, and I already have all this made that fits. So I just fixed the headers, and I made this dipstick that fits. The big clearance issue was down in here. It has to snake around the header and then go back into the pan, and I made it work. You can see that down there. The stick is actually kind of hard to stick in there because it's a blade. It can't bend, you know, like this. It can only bend like this, and the bends kind of goes like this, and then it has to go like this. So you got to fight it to get it to go in there, and it's not that easy, but it works. And the dipstick seems to be the level seems to be right. I tried to get it the level right. I have the oil in the pan. That's like, it's 8 quarts without the filter, so I put 8 quarts in there, and you know, try to get the measurement right. But anyway, getting everything put back together, slowly getting it, all the stuff kind of picked away at the things we need to do, and then we'll get the cab set down on the frame again. And I want to get this thing fired up as quick as possible, just to make sure we're not going to have any issues with all that work we did on the engine. And once we get it fired up and hear it run, see the oil pressure, we'll finish with everything else to get this thing back together and back on the road. All right, guys, well, we got the cab back on the frame. It really didn't go that bad. I
I didn't take as much time lining the thing up as I should have, getting pretty late in the day here, and I was kind of running low on time. And it shows in the alignment, I don't know if you can tell on camera, but the back of the cab is a little bit this way. And it's not too bad on this side, but it does, the back end of the cab needs to shift like that, I think. But luckily enough, these cabs aren't that heavy, and I can kind of shove it over by hand and kind of get it aligned. I'll look through the holes on the back of the cab and see where it needs to go to get aligned, to get lined back up. If I would have spent more time lining the frame up, it would save me in that aspect of it, but it's not too bad, so I just left it be. Now we have all the stuff we got to hook up that is stayed with the cab, and stuff that stayed with the engine, like the brake master cylinder. We need to put that back on the booster, our heater hoses, all that kind of stuff, and our radiator. So over here I have the radiator I'm planning on putting on this thing. Right there is our old radiator, and I'm guessing the cores on this thing is kind of plugged up, and that's why we're having a lot of our heating issues. So this new Champion, I think it's a 3-row radiator. It's either 3 or 4, but this thing's going to cool an awful lot better just by itself if I went back to what I had. But I also have this fan shroud with dual fans. I'm not sure if I'm going to use this or not. I kind of don't like the idea of having electric fans on this truck. I kind of prefer the mechanical fan that rote, just to eliminate having more electrical stuff. But this is the fan I did have on it, and when I was in Colorado, this definitely didn't cut the mustard. It was overheating. But also I was playing around with it, and I think the fan clutch is bad. You can see there where some of the oil leaked out of it. And it is too easy. It seems like it's too easy to spin this. So I don't know if I have a bad fan clutch and that's what caused the problem, or my radiator's plugged up, not allowing enough heat to get to my fan clutch for it to lock up and start pulling, or a combination of all 2 or 3 of those things and cause the problem of overheating. So if I put my aluminum radiator in here, is that going to allow enough heat to get to the fan clutch for it to lock up? Do I need to get a new fan clutch? Do I need to wire in the E-fans, or do I just put a stock mechanical fan on it and know it's good? So I have all those things to consider. I'm not sure what I'm doing just yet, but I do know I'm putting this radiator in for sure, so I'm going to put that thing in there, and luckily we can fire this thing up, and we don't need to worry about the cooling system at this point, but I do want to get this thing fired up as quick as possible. So what I'm going to work on now is just hooking up everything I need to fire this thing up. We probably won't even put the radiator in it, just to hook everything up, fire it up, see what our oil pressure is going to do. Make sure we're not going to spin a bearing right off the bat or something crazy like that before we put a ton of work into this thing and get it all buttoned back up. We'll just fire it up, see what the oil pressure is doing, let it run for 5 minutes or something and shut it off. And that'll be good enough for me to know to move forward with everything else, start finishing putting it up back together. So, yeah, so now it's just all this little stuff I got to hook up, so I'm going to get after it. All right, guys, I think I have everything put together on this thing, enough to fire it off anyways. We're pretty close, got all the ignition stuff hooked back up. I did break my coil, one of the studs, so I got a new coil hooked up. I have all the fuel lines hooked up, and I test everything, make sure everything's turning on as it should. I think I have the fuel system primed enough. I kind of ran the key a few times, enough to make it shut off so it has pressure. But this is a dead fuel rail design. It doesn't have a return on the fuel rails, so there could be some air in the fuel rails, although hopefully they didn't drain too much whenever, I shut it off. Didn't have a bunch of fuel ran out of it, basically. So maybe there's some fuel in there for it to fire. And there was some fuel in this reservoir, so we don't have to wait for the mechanical pump to fill this thing up. So I think we're ready to bark this thing off and see if it'll fire, and mainly see what that fuel pressure is going to do under the, or with our new bearings in there. Which the oil is going to be cold, so if it does build pressure, it's going to be high anyways, because the oil's cold and thick. But I want to make sure that everything's, because we did the oil pan, we did the pickup, I had the oil pump out of it, all that kind of stuff. Make sure I don't have to tear it all back apart again is what we're after here. So I have a new 3-pod gauge system here. If you guys can see that, let me get you set up here. Maybe we'll be able to watch it. But have oil pressure, volts, and temperature, and this is like an electronic sending unit. And so it has like an electronic sender, so you just have a wire going to the sensors on the motor instead of having like an actual tube coming in here with oil pressure. So that's why I got those. I think I'm going to like that a lot better than the old setup. And I've already cranked it over a little bit and saw a little bit of oil pressure coming up. So I think we're going to be good to go, but I haven't seen it come all the way up on the gauge yet. Okay, our fuel pump shut off. Let's give it a go. Make sure we're in park. There we go, we got 80. All right, this thing doesn't have a muffler on it, and man, is it loud. Wow. That kind of reminds me of how much that muffler I had on there is actually doing something, the little muffler. But yeah, we got oil pressure. We had up to about 80, which is about what the pressure relief is on that pump. So that's good. I'm happy with that. It fired off great. I'm going to check it for leaks, and then we'll finish putting it all back together and get the radiator and stuff in so we can get some coolant in this thing and run it a little bit longer. I wanted to show you guys, I think I decided on running those E-fans just because I have them. And while I was digging around over here, I saw the wires for the Edelbrock. They have a fan 1 and a fan 2, and I can program these to turn on at certain temperatures. Like I can have one come on at like 160 and have the second one come on at like 210 or something when it's starting to get hot, or something, you know, something of that nature. I haven't figured out what temperatures it's going to like best or not. I can't remember what thermostat the thing has in it, but I'll have to run these to a relay and then run those fans off of that. So that'll be pretty simple. So I just have the water pump pulley bolted on there with some bolts. But man, this thing is loud. I don't know if that translated the video. I'll have to listen to the video, but this is the muffler I had on it. So it's not a small muffler. It's a Flow FX muffler. So that thing, I guess I wasn't giving enough credit. That really quietened the thing down a lot over what we just heard here. But right there is what's going in it. It's kind of probably a downgrade in some of you guys' minds, but if this thing gets a little bit more tame on the exhaust note, I think it'll be a win-win. That's kind of like a, they call it an RV muffler, but it's like it's a straight through muffler, but it's got a lot more volume there to kind of quiet things down a little bit. So after we got this thing fired up and it sounds good, I'm going to finish off the rest of this stuff and get it bolted back up. And then once we get some coolant in this thing, we'll get it warmed up. All right, guys, update on the truck. I just put my nose to the grindstone and got this thing knocked out. I am quickly running out of time. We're getting ready to start cutting our grass hay July 1st. Today is like the 30th, or it's Saturday, July 1st, Monday, whatever that equates to. So I am quickly running out of time, so I just got this thing done and back together, and you know, good enough to run and call it finished up and good enough for now. So we got everything put together. I got that bigger muffler in it. I got the radiator in it. I got the electric fans wired up. They're all wired up, and I have them set. The first one, I'll probably change these as I kind of get a feel for how this thing likes, but the first one's coming on at 172. I think the thermostat's in it's like 170 or something. I can't remember, going off of kind of what I thought when I thought it opened, going by the temps. So 172, hopefully, you know, one fan will kind of be doing the job most of the time. And then if it gets above 200, I have the second fan coming on. I think I did 198 just to, you know, give it a little buffer zone. Since it has a lower degree thermostat, you know, I'm okay with turning them on that low. If you had like a stock style thermostat that was like 180 or 190, I'd probably bump those numbers up just so your fans aren't running all the time, because it's going to have a hard time cooling it down lower than the thermostat temps. So there's no sense in having your fans come on before thermostat temps. But I think I have a little lower one on this one just to give, you know, hedge my bets a little bit for when it starts to overheat. The air cleaner, my nice fancy factory style air cleaner, didn't fit, unfortunately. My brace here, this is my brace for my coilover towers. Since they're so high up and they support all the way to the truck, I have them braced together just so they don't try to bend in and bend that frame in. And it's also a mount for my reservoirs to get them out of the way. And the snorkel on the air cleaner hit it here. I should have tried it before I put the cab down, but I knew it was going to be close. And when I started putting it together, I realized it just wasn't going to work. So I put the old air cleaner back on it. It works. I would prefer the look of the original. I might change this up at some point so I can run the original, but for now, that's what we're running. I have the old seat I had in here, back in here, just a recovered bench seat. It is not that great. It is not that comfortable. And I do at some point want to mess with the interior. I think the first time I talked about this, I talked about doing different seats and maybe doing some sound deadening in here. I obviously ran out of time and we're not doing that this go around, but maybe in the future I want to do some sound deadening in here, either be it the lizard skin stuff or the Dynamite kind of stuff, stick on the bottom, something to kind of, you know, knock the sound down in here and help with insulation and stuff in the wintertime, help your heater, and then in the summertime I don't have AC in here. That would be nice. Maybe at some point I'll put AC in here, but for now, this is what we're working with. I just went everything back together the way it was. And for the muffler, you can see there's my new muffler I put in there, and we struck out on the muffler. This is actually louder than my old muffler. So that didn't work quite the way I wanted it to, since we are now louder. I guess I could fire it up and show you guys, and I think it sounds worse. Probably because it's a cheaper muffler and it's like a chambered muffler, where that Flowmaster muffler is a packed muffler, like with packing. It's kind of more resonating and kind of, I don't know how to, I'll just start it up. You guys can hear it. Pretty loud. So, yeah. Really loud. I can't even hardly hear myself talking here. Of course, we're in the shop, so that's going to make it worse. But I don't know what makes this thing so loud. If it's my cam, the cam profile I have, or if it's the fact that I have headers, or a combination of the two, or, you know, just a higher flowing engine has more air going out the exhaust and just makes a louder exhaust. So I'm back to the drawing board on my exhaust. I got to change it up some way. It's just louder than I want it to be, and just gets old after a while. So I have some other options I'm going to look at, but for now we're going to leave it because it runs and drives. And I also wanted to do something with the rear suspension, and we don't have time for that, so we're leaving it the way it is. But like I said, that leaves room for another episode. We can kind of do that interior stuff and that new exhaust and the rear suspension upgrades in the future, and we'll make another video out of this deal. But for now, it runs and drives, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to go take this thing out for a drive and take you guys along, and I can kind of show off the Ultimate Highboy and take you guys for a ride in it. So let's go. Well, guys, we're out here driving. I got the everything all put together and driving. We've had some hiccups, though. Sorry about the wind. It is really hot today, and I'm not rolling these windows up for nothing. So if there's some wind noise, I apologize now. But went out and started driving this thing and had some hiccups. The transmission was doing all kinds of funky stuff and flaring shifts, and it was throwing codes on the US shift controller. So I knew something was wrong. Crawled up under the truck and did some investigating, and I actually pinched the wiring harness under the rear cab support, the floor support, and the top of the transfer case where it gets really close. So pinched that together there, and it messed up some wires. I think it was grounding some wires out. Luckily, it didn't break any, and was able to kind of patch those up and get those moved out of the way. And it seems to be shifting great now, so that's a big relief. I was kind of worried that there was something going wrong with my transmission, but it seems to be shifting great now. I'm also having some problems with the EFI, the Edelbrock. I'm running the Edelbrock ProFlow 4 on this thing, and it's running really lean on throttle. So like if it was a carburetor, I'd want to give it more accelerator pump, but you give it some throttle and it starts choking out and runs really lean on the air fuel. Have the gauges pulled up here on the tablet, you know, monitoring stuff, and I'm not sure what's causing that. I cleared the self-learning tables and started it to relearn, and maybe it'll kind of clear itself out, because I know whenever you have exhaust leaks and stuff, it can throw off your O2 sensor, and that might have caused some the computer to learn some bad things. And maybe now that I have it all sealed up, it's running different or something of that nature. So I have all that cleared, and we're doing some relearning on that. See if I can get that thing sorted back out. But other than that, I'm really happy to have the Ultimate Highboy back on the road and running and driving again, at least closer to 100% than it was. Mainly having that starter fixed where I'm not worried about being stranded somewhere if that starter falls off. is going to be a big deal. So I'm more comfortable driving this thing in farther distances and getting farther away from home. So I'm going to get some more miles on this thing. Kind of wanted to chat about the Ultimate Highboy here a little bit, kind of the my feelings on it, what I've changed, anything different, how would I have done it different if I'm building it again. Really, the biggest thing I'm not really happy with it in its current form is the rear suspension and the seat, and kind of the interior vibe in this thing, because it's really noisy in here, and I really wanted to kind of quieten the thing down. But yeah, the rear suspension is just way too stiff. I don't know if you can tell when we're driving on the gravel roads here, bouncing around a lot on the back end. The back end's bouncing, the front end's nice and solid, but then that back end gets a little bouncy and just makes the ride a little rougher. So get that fixed up. And this seat here, it's just a bench seat I had out of my 67 crew cab that we're rebuilding on the channel. And it is not a great seat. I feel like they redid the foam with cardboard or something. It's not comfortable at all. I don't mind a bench seat if they're comfortable, and this one is not one. But I have a couple options I'm thinking about for seats on this thing, considering this is kind of an off-roader for me. I thought about doing the PRP suspension seats, bucket seats in it. I also have a set of like 2011 Super Duty seats out of the ambulance that the engine for the Ultimate crew cab came out of. I thought about putting those in here. So I have a few options there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there. We'll see what happens when I have time to mess with that. And then the sound deadening, like I mentioned before, just to kind of quiet the cab down. The temperature today is really, I mentioned air conditioning. The temperature today is really making me think about that air conditioning system and putting it in this thing. I'm not sure I would do the whole like vintage air system where it replaces the whole heater box and everything, but maybe one where it just does under the dash, like an old vintage setup. I think that would be pretty good in here, and not have to mess with doing the whole heater box replacement and everything. Just do an add-on deal that goes under the dash. But yeah, we got our gauges working up there. The temperatures are doing good. The fans, I let this thing idle for a long time and watch the fans and saw how the temperatures are acting. When the single fan comes on, it's not enough to keep control of it at idle, so it kind of creeps up there. But once it gets up to 195, where I have the second fan to turn on, it cools down almost immediately from that and goes all the way back down to where the second fan shuts off, and then it kind of starts the whole process over again. So that lets me know that we have enough cooling for idle at least. And obviously going down the road, we're fine because we have added airflow from driving. But the main thing I was having is whenever I was pulling mountain grades at slow speed and low range, the thing was overheating on me. So we'll see how that works out. I can't really test that here without getting in the mountains and trying, but I think we'll be a lot better off than we were. So I'm going to get some more miles on this thing. I'm going to see if the self-learning straightens itself out and this thing gets to running better. Man, I have a lot of people that ask me about the fuel injection system I have on this truck and what I think about it, and I'm not really sold on it. I'm kind of wishing I would have put a carburetor on it at this point, but I know the fuel injection is going to be a lot better when we're up in the mountains at high elevation, and it can correct for elevation and how much air is up there. So it's kind of a trade-off, I guess. This system is very expensive now. I think when I bought it, I don't know if the price went way up or I bought it on sale or something, but I think if I remember right, I paid like $1,800 for the setup, but now it's like $2,800 for everything. I don't remember paying that much. I'll have to go back and look. It's been a while. It's been a long time since I bought it. But man, at that price point, I think I would pass. I don't know. It just seems like it adds a lot of complexity and doesn't really gain a lot of benefits. A good tuned carburetor will run just flawlessly for you. It's just the tuning and getting it there is the biggest problem. So I guess you fiddle with it on the front end, it pays you back on the back end. And the idea with these EFI systems was you just bolt it on and it runs perfect. You don't have to do any tuning on it because it's self-learning. But man, I've had to fiddle with it a lot. It's kind of giving me some problems. But anyway, we'll cut this video off here. I know this is kind of a long one. I thank you guys for sticking with me and waiting for me to upload this video. I know it's taken me a while to get it out to you, and it might be a minute before I get another one out there, but we'll definitely get another video for you guys. Whatever vehicle I'm working on, I'll be able to show you guys. So subscribe if you want to see that. Give me a thumbs up if you like this truck. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.